Welcome back, Jill.
Hey, good to see you, Sabby. I see you're dressed for the weather. Me too.
I know it's hot. It's finally hot enough. Because usually, July 4th is one of the really hot days that we get here. And now
Yeah.
it's for this year, for whatever reason, it wasn't as warm, but it's now finally hot enough.
Oh, yeah, hot enough. Totally over the top hot. At least in my house.
All right, guys, my special guest today is Dr. Jill Stein. She was a former Green Party presidential candidate, and she is now a part of Dr. Cornel West's presidential campaign. Jill, so as you can imagine, I think a lot of us are really curious to how these events unfolded in reference to Dr. West's campaign. He came onto the show the week that he announced that he was running for president, and originally he was running with the People's Party. I did voice to him during that interview some of my concerns with that organization and particularly the leadership. But then later on, he announced that he would be running as a Green. So I'm curious, can you explain to everyone, how did those events unfold? And did you reach out to Dr. West or did they reach out to you?
We reached out to Dr. West, and what happened was, for me, it was like seeing his interview on Democracy Now!, which I think was on a Wednesday. I think he announced on a Monday. He did Democracy Now! On a Wednesday. And it just really tied my stomach in a knot watching that, because it was clear that it wasn't working. And he was really being kind of, sidelined. It was kind of coming out of left field for him. He didn't know kind of what he was getting into. He had been involved, I think, more at the policy level or at the advisory level, but not actually involved in the political fray. And, more power to him. There aren't a lot of people who are leading a secure, life as an activist and an academic who dare to stick their necks out in the world of politics. And I think it's a real tribute to him that he was willing to go, into the great unknown. Same thing happened to me, 20 years ago in the basically the year 2000 for the 2002 election. I had no idea what I was getting into. And you just don't until you're out there doing it. So he was kind of getting shell-shocked, I think, by what it was like, and that what he really needed a party that knew how to get him on the ballot, and that didn't come with a whole set of controversies that he was kind of encountering for the first time. And I saw that on a Wednesday, and I thought, oh my God, this is not okay. And he's just not going to survive this. And I, at that point, began calling around to people who've been active in the Green Party and who've been through this rodeo before, to get a sense, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Are you feeling like this needs to be happening inside the Green Party? Because I didn't want to make waves if it was just me thinking this. So I called maybe 20 different people, and Ajamu Baraka and I had been in conversation about the presidential race and the upcoming elections and all that. And we're having a very active dialogue. So, he was one of the people that I called first. And I have to say, everybody that I talked to felt exactly the same way, that we've had a long-term relationship with Cornel. I think he was actively courted for a while by the People's Party. And, they put together notable conferences and rallies and stuff like that. And if you haven't been through the political rodeo before, you don't know that actually running an election and getting on the ballot, especially as a third party or an independent, is not about conferences and rallies and stuff like that. You can't learn on the fly how to do ballot access. And Greens have been struggling with this since 1996, every 4 years. And to their credit, we keep fighting, and we live to fight another day. And just as an aside, people are always saying, oh, the Greens, they're so weak. Yeah, but compared to what? It's like every other independent, non-corporate political party that really challenges power generally gets wiped off the map ever since the 1920s or so, when political repression really kicked up, independent political parties don't really last more than about a decade. That's what you would expect. So the Greens keep fighting. We live to fight another day. All political parties are very flawed animals, in my experience. They all are. And independent, non-corporate grassroots parties have their own unique set of challenges. But among them, look at Peace and Freedom Party or the various socialist parties. They may have a city council where they're active, or in some instances a state, like Peace and Freedom Party. You can look at the Citizens Party, which was kind of like a predecessor of the Greens in, I think, the 1980s. And they had a kind of a widely known ecologist at the time who sort of put this stuff on the map. They lasted really 2 election cycles. That's all, because the minute you become a threat, you're basically blocked from media. You are vilified and demonized, and it becomes very hard to run an organization when you can't raise money, when you can't get covered in the press, the usual stuff. So at any rate, we reached out to Dr. West. Actually, we reached out to Chris Hedges, and I called him on Friday. And when he was fiddling with his phone, in that famous video, he and I were texting to see if we could get something set up for the next day. So it's like we saw the Democracy Now! On Wednesday, called around on Thursday, contacted Chris on Friday, and we all met on Saturday. And the decision kind of made itself. It really did not take a lot of persuasion. It was like really clear what we were talking about. And that was with Ajamu and myself and Chris. And then Dr. West and a couple of his close advisors. And we all agreed that this is just the way to go. He needed to be running within the structure of the Green Party, competing basically for the Green Party's nomination. And that concurrently, the Greens would be fighting for ballot access, which we're doing anyhow, but now doing it with a whole lot more, enthusiasm. It's just been an incredible wave of joy that's pouring into the campaign, and it's unlike any other campaign that I've been a part of, because there's, Dr. West is not new. He's a known quantity, and he's not figuring out his agenda. He's been talking about it for decades. So people really know him, and it's especially, working people and the poor who are being thrown under the bus by the current political options. So there's just so much excitement and delight that people who've been locked out, marginalized communities, suddenly now have a voice that they can trust. And it's been just really wonderful watching people pour into the campaign.
Agreed. Now, I know, if I remember correctly, I believe you were on the ballot when you ran in over 40 states. If I remember correctly, you had a quite a good amount of ballot access.
We had 47. There were 3 states in which we qualified as a write-in candidate. So with those 3, we were on 47. And the 3 that we weren't on, are low population states. I don't remember which ones they were, but we were on the ballot for at least 95% of Americans had a choice.
Yep, that's what I thought. So for some people, because I do call in once a week too, so some people have asked that question. They're like, well, how is he going to get, more ballot access? And I always remind them, well, Jill was on the ballot in over 40 states. Like, it's not talked about a lot, but I think people need to continue to reiterate that point. But the other thing that I have noticed is that there are these, quote unquote, progressive outlets like Jacobin and The Nation. I don't know if we call The Nation progressive anymore. They have been pretty consistent in reference to creating these articles within the past couple of weeks saying that Dr. West should run as a Democrat. Now, for me, that is a no-go. They even gone as far as to lie and to say so that he can get on the debate stage. But what debate stage when we know that the Democratic Party has already said there's not going to be any primary debates? Do you think that they are afraid that Dr. West running as a third party candidate makes them uncomfortable or puts them in an uncomfortable position, because now, considering Dr. West is someone that they admire and they really like, now it looks some kind of way if they don't support Dr. West because he's not running as a Democrat, even though he's running on those progressive policies that they championed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this exposes the fundamental contradiction of progressive Democrats that, where exactly are you going to go with this? How are you going to build a more powerful campaign than what Bernie Sanders had, where he had more volunteers, more grassroots support, more money than really one could ever hope for. And still he was slapped down twice. You look at Dennis Kucinich, where did he get on the debate stage? He was excluded from the debate stage, and they kept changing the requirements so that he couldn't make it. He could never reach the threshold, and then they redistricted him so that he would be basically removed from Congress. And you could look at gosh, I'm forgetting his name, but the vice presidential candidate who ran with FDR, where they actually Wallace, Henry Wallace, who was really an out socialist and had a huge base of support. And they basically they called a fire emergency at the Democratic convention in Chicago that year in order to prevent him from getting nominated. They will stop at nothing. And if a progressive does get in, then they won't support them anyhow, which happened once, George McGovern, where the Democratic Party basically withdrew their support. So this is not something new. And, we kind of know where we're going if we stay within the Democratic Party box. People are sick of it. They don't need convincing, just take a look at the polls and you will see that people are tearing their hair out. People are really, clamoring for another independent political choice, at least one other. And the numbers now show that twice as many people identify as politically independent or third party now as identify as either Democrat or Republican. So it's not like we have to compel people to think independently. People are already thinking independently. And for the institutions that carry the water for the Democratic Party, this is a very uncomfortable position for them. And they're trying to come up with reasons for basically to discredit a real fundamental political challenge. But if you don't challenge, we're just going to keep running in the same circle. And we are going over the waterfall right now. We do not have time to keep going through what's not working. Now, it's true, it's no walk in the park to build an independent party or a coalition of independent, non-corporate progressive parties. It's not easy, but there is no other way. And unless you do that, unless you draw a line in the sand and say, this is who we are, these are our values, you are destined to just build something and have it completely torn apart when that race is over. So where does it get you? Where did Bernie Sanders get? He was appointed head of the budget committee. How much good did that do him? He was able to propose a great bill, which then the Democratic leadership, tore apart. And what we got was the Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically a fossil fuels first bill that does not do what it claims to do, and an infrastructure bill, which is essentially, it has some good things in it, but it's a privatization Trojan horse, and it's not going to do what the American public needs. These are all just giveaways, more giveaways to corporate America. So, what became of that huge revolution? You cannot have a revolution within a counter-revolutionary party. We've seen that over and over again. We need to draw a line in the sand, and then we need to build a party.
Well said. So one of the things that stood out to me, I interviewed Jared and Elizabeth Beck. They were the lawyers that filed the DNC fraud lawsuit after Bernie lost in 2016. And they are very, very bitter. Like when they came on, like you could just
Wow.
see it in like their face. They're very bitter about the way that things transpired in reference to that lawsuit. Given the fact that we know that the DNC is a corporation, like they explained this very well, and they explained how Bruce Spiva, who was the attorney for the DNC, basically let them know that they did not have to give you a fair election because they're a corporation, and the DNC does not have to, make sure that the super delegates actually go to Bernie Sanders, even if he won like every county in West Virginia. So, given that we know that information, why do you think people like RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson are still willing to try to run in the Democratic Party? And they know this information as well because RFK Jr. told Russell Brand that he's like, look, I know it's rigged. I know they're going to give all the super delegates to Joe Biden.
Mm.
So why even go down that road? Why do you feel they don't want to take that same position that Dr. West has chosen?
I think it's like being in an abusive relationship. When you're in an abusive relationship, you tend to just take the demands of the abuser as the gospel. And I think this is a fundamental problem. I think it helps not to be financially secure. If you're financially secure, you have an incentive. There's a saying from Upton Sinclair, I think, the novelist who was also like a socialist, that it's hard to convince a man of something when his livelihood depends on not knowing it. And so those who are comfortably situated in society, and it's more older generation, it's more white, it's more, professional managerial class, they are defending their turf here. And it's really hard to do that mindset change. That's why, political change is often coming up the age ladder, and as Gen Zs and millennials are coming up that ladder, they are not, I don't need to tell you, young people are not kind of getting into secure niches in society. It's just not there. The jobs are really crappy, and and housing is unaffordable, totally unaffordable. So the things that one would expect to come with adulthood don't happen. You're just carrying student debt with you and having the rug pulled out from you in healthcare and housing and education and jobs and and air and water and the climate. It's like, how much worse can it get? Things are only getting worse and worse. And it's like kind of mind-boggling that an older and more secure generation can't see it. But, we're all flawed human beings, and we kind of carry around this screen, this filter. And so people tend to be very locked into their politics, the politics of their family or the politics that they grew up with. And the people who aren't, are, what should we say, the harbingers of the future that we need. And fortunately, public opinion has really changed. So it's no longer like that a radical rethinking, a transformative agenda. You don't really have to argue for it at all. I discovered that even in 2002 when I ran my first race and discovered, oh my God, the rebellion is already happening. We don't have to convince people. We just have to inform people that there is an option, and empower people to take control. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it. And people are living this crisis. They don't need to be convinced. That is, unless you're in the top 10 or 20%, you are living this crisis right now. And even if you are privileged, if you're looking at what's happening to everybody, the economy is really a drag on everybody. Our health crisis impacts everybody. A COVID epidemic impacts everybody. And the crashing and burning climate, and it's not just climate, it's every dimension of our environment, it's our water and our air and everything. you don't have to be convinced that there's a crisis here. And I think we're watching the empire really double down to force people, to saturate people with propaganda 24/7, coming through social media, coming through mainstream media, coming through the legacy press. In every way, people are being told to be good little boys and girls, or else something really terrible will happen. It's kind of voter extortion. Votes are being extorted from people out of fear. And what has the politics of fear delivered? Everything we were afraid of. We're having, just in enormous quantities. So it's really important for us to stand up based on our core values. As Martin Luther King said, the choice is between chaos or community. And we see chaos is just accelerating all around us. It's not going to get better without us. And to quote Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. So who is that demand going to come from, except us? We got to stand up and do it.
That's right. Now, Jill, you're Professor West. You're his campaign manager, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one of the questions that has come up, which a lot of us experienced with the Bernie Sanders movement, was that it was a movement, but the movement was to get Bernie Sanders elected, so to speak, right? So what we saw happen, particularly after 2020, after Bernie decided to, suspend like his campaign in 2020, the movement that Bernie Sanders built across this country had nowhere to go because Bernie lost that election, and then he just went back to being a senator and just seemed to kind of disappear in some of these larger grassroots movements that were happening in reference to like Medicare for All marches that we had across this country. Just seemed to kind of disappear in so many ways, and to just quickly come out and support Joe Biden for re-election and not the candidates that are running on progressive policies. I think it was a big mask off moment for Bernie Sanders. So a lot of people are not happy with Bernie Sanders. In reference to Dr. West's campaign, if Dr. West were not to win, would there be a movement for the voters to go back to? And how would you build that movement? Would it be, or would it involve something in reference to worker strike actions, et cetera, or mutual aid? That's some of the questions I think people are curious to know. Like, will we have something to go back to afterwards?
Yes. And I think you'll find that fleshed out as the campaign moves forward. But that's really very much what Dr. West has been saying from the get-go. This is really about building a broad social movement, giving it a political voice, but continuing to build the movement as we go. So I know he will be connecting with Workers Strike Back, that he will be connecting with Medicare for All. This isn't like new to him. It's like that's where he lives. So I'm finding people generally don't need to be convinced that Dr. West is going to be true to the movement. I think everything he does is going to be very much grounded in building the movement above all. And exactly what form that takes, we've been what shall we say? We've been pretty preoccupied with just transforming his structure. It's way easier to launch and manage a campaign if you're starting from the beginning. If you have to undo the paperwork and the financial infrastructure and all that, it's way more complicated and involves a lot of lawyers and just incredible struggling with the FEC bureaucracy and rules to make this happen. So we haven't been able to go full bore yet on policies and field organizing and all that, but it's still quite early in the campaign. So I think we can look forward to that. And I really want to encourage people to go to the website, cornelwest24.org, and sign up and say what you want to say, give feedback, because we're reading all of it. And Dr. West is also seeing most of it. And people are, providing really great suggestions and are essentially taking the ball and running with it. So, for example, New Jersey, the New Jersey Green Party is, it's not, I always have to draw a line between the party and the campaigns, because the campaigns are not yet supported by the party. So I should say activists in the New Jersey Green Party. It's not the party. The party has to remain neutral until it's gone through a process. But activists are building right now a kind of a conference to bring together a lot of movement people. It's not just Greens, to just bring us together and look, and take this ball and run with it, because it's going to push the issues. It's going to change the presidential dialogue. And people don't have to be persuaded that Dr. West has, integrity and a track record, and we know where he stands and what he's going to do and what he's going to keep doing. So people are really excited, and they are going ahead and creating their own grassroots structures, which we will support from within the campaign. And but you don't have to wait for us. We are, that is like the next part of the campaign that we will be building out and developing after we get sort of our FEC compliance and financial infrastructure all set up, and we have some breathing room. Then we're going to get down to building out the campaign. And I just want to invite people, to be a part of ballot access, or or phone banking, or visibility, or outreach to key constituencies, people who are struggling at the workplace, or for healthcare, or battles over rent control and affordable housing. I mean, all of these issues are living in our communities. There are huge battles going on right here, and people very much need those battles to be lifted up and supported by a political voice and a political movement. So I'd say it's not different from what activists are doing right now.
So one of the things I do like about Dr. West is his position on the Israel-Palestine issue. I feel like he gets this right. And even though his opinion about this issue is not a popular one, and that's the thing, he's willing to stand up for something even if it's not popular. Obviously, we know that Harvard University chose not to give him tenure because he wanted to stand with the Palestinian people. Do you think that a position like Israel and Palestine and this war with Russia and Ukraine, do you see foreign policy, particularly those two issues, playing a big part in the presidential election for 2024, and why or why not?
When Dr. West talks about the campaign, he invariably puts abolishing poverty and ending endless wars and ending cop city or cop cities and mass incarceration. Those are always front and center. And then, he goes on to talk about reparations and healthcare and reproductive health and all of that. So, and the climate. So that's kind of like his sphere, but I always see him leading with demilitarization and a foreign policy that's based on international law, not on rules-based order, which is basically whatever the empire decides is the rule of the day, but rather on international law, human rights, and diplomacy. So he's consistent. He's been here, and I don't see him changing one iota. He is not ducking, and he is taking the heat, and all the heat that's coming at him for being a challenger outside of the parties of war and Wall Street. It's really just wonderful to see someone who is so grounded in, really the struggle of Black liberation and anti-colonialism. It's like he's really not fazed by the small things of campaigns. He's really very much grounded on the voices that he sees as his predecessors and continuing that message. So I don't see him bowing to political expediency at all.
Why do you feel like someone like RFK Jr., because I covered his campaign announcement when he was here in Boston. I covered it on the ground.
You did a great
And
job. Yeah, really
oh,
appreciated
thank
that.
you. I was very surprised about his, because I was there for that. And so later on, when I found out about his position on Israel and Palestine, I was very, very, very surprised. I did not know that his uncle and his father had a similar position in reference to Israel. Like
Oh.
they didn't talk about that in the history textbooks in school. So I was very surprised that someone who is really great on the war issue in reference to foreign policy and imperialism, I was really surprised that he doesn't seem to have that same uh, ideology in reference to Israel and Palestine. Do you think it's that he just really doesn't understand and needs to be educated on that issue, which someone like Max Blumenthal offered to do on the Gray Zone? Or do you think he does know, but he's afraid more so of the Israel lobby?
It's hard to get inside his head, and I can't say I know. All you can do is like watch what he does, and I'm waiting and watching and hoping that he will allow himself to be educated. Is that going to happen? I don't know. I don't have a thorough understanding of him. I have not studied him. There are many things I really like and respect about him. I don't agree with all of his policies, but I haven't studied all of them either. So I don't want to give him a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but just to say, I would be very interested in an ongoing conversation, except that he's in the Democratic Party. And to me, that is just like shooting yourself in the foot. So I don't see that he has a future. And he may stir up the dialogue, and that's great. And I'm really glad he's doing it. I'm glad that Marianne Williamson is doing it in her own way. I'm glad that they are challenging Democratic power, but I would not spend time on those campaigns myself, because we know where they go, and they're very unlikely to measure up to the standard of the Bernie Sanders campaigns, which were, I think, as powerful as you can get. They were more powerful than the front runners. In many ways, they were more powerful, but they will be sabotaged. So why waste your time? We don't have time to waste. Whether you're looking at the war in Ukraine and its continued acceleration, and now they're going to send cluster bombs because they're that desperate, because I want to call it the surge. It's it's just another name for another public relations campaign to pretend that things are going to change. It's not the surge, it's the counter offensive. They're just trying to drag this out. What for? This is like the craziest war that really has nothing to offer the American people, and there are so many reasons not to be doing it, but it keeps progressing, going down this slippery slope towards nuclear Armageddon. We don't have much time. We need a ceasefire, and we need a diplomatic process to begin right now, and you won't hear mention of that in the Democratic and Republican establishment. A little bit from some Republicans, but it's sort of very arbitrary and not exactly sincere or grounded in a broader policy perspective. But it's so clear. Yeah, the war is murderous and the war is illegal, including Russia's part in it. But the war actually began way before that with a much bigger and more murderous game plan, which you could call full spectrum dominance on the part of the USA, which was really declared formally as early as 1990, approximately, where we said we will not tolerate rising powers and competitors, not militarily, not economically, not politically. We will crush them, whether they are friend or foe. This is not allowed. So the U.S. has really been, if you just scratch below the surface, it's very clear that the U.S. has had a consistent policy, certainly since the 90s, to basically prevent Russia's rise. I mean, look at what happened when we orchestrated the election of Boris Yeltsin, who basically just privatized the wealth and resources. That was really our doing, and we wanted Russia to stay there. And damn Putin, comes along and says, no, you can't do this to us, and helped sort of get Russia back on its feet, which was very alarming to the U.S. But, even from before Yeltsin's time, we were dead set on in fact, Clinton made a deal with Yeltsin to hold off on NATO expansion so that he wouldn't, interfere with Yeltsin's reelection campaign that the U.S. got fully behind. But you can go back even before the 1990s. You can look at what happened after the Second World War. And don't take my word for it. Go to the U.S. National Archives, where it's very well documented by a congressional research effort to hold Nazis accountable after the Second World War. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's been very well documented by Consortium News, and maybe you've been talking about it as well. But we had a policy that was only revealed, I think, in like 2010, thereabouts. It was held back because it's so explosive that the CIA was cultivating Ukrainian Nazis and brought them back to the U.S. in order to conduct a terrorism campaign and false flags and so on in order to incriminate Russians in Ukraine and to basically promote this divide, and the internal conflict between Russia and Ukraine going way back, post Second World War. This was going on. Mm-hmm. So there's a long history here. You don't want to just start the clock on February 22nd or whatever it was in 2022. The war had a long history, and you can't solve one part of the crisis here. You can't solve the conflict just by looking at Russia's, incursion into Ukraine, which was a terrible thing. It's causing, just horrors and devastation. But it was a response to ongoing horrors and devastation fundamentally promoted by the U.S. and its allies. So we need a big solution here. We need a big solution that protects Ukraine above all, because they're the ones who are really the sacrificial lamb, and it's just awful to see. The solution has to involve all the players here who are really, carving up and murdering and pillaging across the planet. Ukraine is, as horrible as it is, it doesn't really hold a candle to Afghanistan, where we were there for 20 years, or to Iraq, or to Libya, the ongoing conflict in Syria. So, the problem here is fundamentally the U.S. game plan, an empire that will, go stop at nothing in order to maintain its stranglehold on power. Now that's coming to an end for external reasons as well, because there is a power shift going on. We're now living in a multipolar world. So for our own benefit, let alone the rest of the world, we need to get with the program here, and we need to re-elevate international law. Because if it's strictly the whim of the dominant player, we are not going to be in that dominant player for very much longer. We need to be viewing this as kind of a team player here, because we're all players, and we got to have something that works for all of us. Enough kind of approaching foreign policy as if it's just who's the latest bully in the schoolyard. That doesn't work. Elliot Abram does not belong. I mean, what a joke. And what does that say about Biden? That he's appointing the arch villain of foreign policy to diplomacy. This is like laughable, sick, pathological. And to me, it just confirms why we're doing what we're doing and why we need a voice like Dr. West's, whose specialty really is speaking to people from the heart and bringing people together. Everybody's his brother, everybody. He'll call you a gangster, and he'll call you his brother. He does that kind of, or sister. He's kind of indiscriminate in calling things out, but always building a bridge and like trying to affirm the humanity. And if you look at people who really have experience in diplomacy, if you listen to like what Jeffrey Sachs says, he's been around the block on this a few times. He says, diplomats really have to approach this as a human situation. I think that's part of the problem, is that you have all these psychopaths in the political system, and who are trying to conduct diplomacy when they're just like kind of rotten to the core. They don't know what it means to have an equitable relationship. They're not the people you want your lives to depend on here. We need a really transformation of our political system, so it is not being bought and paid for by a very sick corporate culture of the economic elite.
That's right. There seems to be a plan for a summer of strikes. We're going to pivot a little bit to labor here, because I'm sure you've heard UPS may possibly go on strike at the end of this month. So there's that. There's the LA hotel strikes that are happening right now. And then you also have this issue with Cop City, which I'm glad you mentioned as well, which I think could be just an intro to the possibility of us having more cop cities in the future, and not just Atlanta. Do you see the Dr. West campaign getting involved in reference to some of these labor strikes that are about to happen, and also a cop city as well?
Absolutely. And he always is, and always has been very connected with the labor movement, and with protests of all sorts, but especially, standing up for our much abused First Amendment rights, for press freedom, for freedom of speech, and the right to protest, which is just being savaged all over the place, and, protesters, climate protesters have been charged as terrorists now for quite some time. There's one woman who trespassed, in relation to an oil pipeline, and is in jail now for 7 or 8 years. I mean, there's just been draconian stuff going on, and it's not only the right of protest, it's also, Julian Assange, and just our right to know what government is doing in our name, and all these things go together. And Dr. West, to his credit, has been very outspoken and on the ground, and he's an activist and doesn't hesitate to be on the front lines and get arrested himself. So, he's going to keep on being who he is. And, what other candidates are doing that now? I haven't seen any others that are out there on the front lines, and that's just who he is. We are beginning to draw up those plans right now to, identify when and what he's going to do and where he'll be when, and so on. So stay tuned, and go to his website, get on the newsletter updates, and be a part of the revolution, because it's here.
Awesome. Well said, Jill. In reference to the Green Party, because I think this is another question that has come my way a couple of times. We realize there seems to be a Howie Hawkins faction of the Green Party. And I think Howie Hawkins, his position in reference to, let's say, this war with Russia and Ukraine, I do not agree with. I know a lot of people don't agree with as well. Has there been any type of pushback or hesitancy in reference to Dr. West running through the Green Party in reference to that Howie Hawkins faction of the Green Party? And if so, how do you feel that can change or shift in the future?
Well, my sense, and let me just say, I think that faction associated with Howie Hawkins is very, very small. So we had a vote in March, I think, related to the, maybe it was April, I don't recall, but there were 2 rallies, the Rage Against the Machine, and then there was the Fund People, Not the War Machine. And the anti-war sentiment basically won out in both. But in the second event, where we had a lot of dialogue and the question was much clearer, it wasn't kind of embedded in kind of other related political issues. It was much more clearly about war. Howie's faction got, I think, like 8 votes, and the anti-war faction got like 90 votes. So Howie's faction is tiny now and really does not have clout or influence. You know, most people profoundly disagree with him. That's not everybody, but it's most people. So I don't think that Hawkins, faction is a thing, really. And I've also heard secondhand, but this was based on statements he made in his podcast, that he was seriously considering not running and sort of withdrawing his plans to run because he basically supports Cornel. And while Howie supports weaponizing Ukraine and supposedly defending human rights in Ukraine, he's kind of a victim of that propaganda campaign, this sort of false human rights campaign that would have us drop bombs, to defend human rights. His faction, his ideas, that's kind of like where the problem is. He supports the dismantling of NATO. Well, I shouldn't say that it's entirely confined to that one issue in Ukraine, because he tends to want to beat back against these authoritarians. He's quick to accept Department of Defense talking points about authoritarians and how we have to fight them and stand up to them. He was a Marine himself, and he just seems to have absorbed some of that mindset. So that aside, I think he basically agrees with Cornel West's platform across the board. So I don't see major opposition within the Green Party at this point. There are always a few people, who will be naysayers, but I don't see anything really substantive out there. And what I do see is a huge mobilization, which is really exciting on behalf of Dr. West right now.
One thing I would add in reference to like the West campaign that I think a lot of people, especially those of us in independent media, but just in general, the censorship issue is a huge issue for a lot of people. I'm sure you saw, as with the case with the Twitter files, a lot of information came out into reference to how the federal government, the FBI and CIA agencies were trying to censor people through the use of the Twitter executives. So this is an issue that I think RFK Jr. is really, really good on, is the censorship and calling for no censorship. That is one thing I would add or recommend in reference to the West campaign, to have some type of position on where does he stand in reference to the censorship, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, etc. And that's an issue I think that basically spreads across all political ideologies.
Yeah, totally. And if you have any intentions of being a third party or independent candidate, if you're not at war with censorship, then you're just saying, bring it on, silence me and lock me out, because who is more the target really than the left? So I definitely see, him aligning with that point of view. And Chris Hedges, who is very much, very articulate on this stuff. Chris Hedges is one of the core advisors on the campaign. So I don't think there's any way this is gonna, escape the major talking points of this campaign. And I will say myself, as someone that Matt Taibbi clarified that Julian Assange and I are in the same bucket. We're as far as Twitter is concerned. So, I consider this, just it's kind of a life or death issue. How can we have? How can we ever hold government accountable? If voices are being silenced, and it's critics like us who will be on the firing line of the censorship. So we really have to take a very clear point of view and allow opinions that we may not like. That just comes with the territory. You have to allow a diversity of opinions to be heard, and we need it.
Who do you think will be, if you had to guess, who do you think would be his running mate, or who do you think would be a good option for that?
To tell you the truth, I've been so anchored in the minutia of just kind of getting the campaign up and running. I haven't had to go there to think about it, but it's not hard to think of people who would really, flesh out the ticket. And we're getting suggestions all across the map. So, I'll just say, if people have ideas you're excited about, definitely let us know and put a comment on the website, and we'll get there eventually. We're not there yet, but we will.
I think it should be either you or a Jamu Baraka.
That's a very interesting idea.
All right, Jill. Well, really quick before you go, can you just remind everyone again, how can people get involved with his campaign?
So go to cornelwest24.org, and you will be on his website, and then you can either volunteer or you can just insert a comment, and then you can decide whether your comment will be public or not too, and and then take it from there. Our ballot access drives are underway right now. We have teams that are working in Alaska and New Jersey, and maybe some others as well. And we have a ballot access manager that is Rick Lass, who's the same guy. He's this wonderful, talented, very uplifting kind of team player who got us on 47 ballots in 2016. And he is managing the campaign. And so we have now, I think it's like 600 or 700, it might even be up to 800 volunteers for ballot access specifically. And there are thousands of volunteers who have signed up, many more thousands who have just plugged into the website as supporters. Dr. West's Twitter account right now is what we're using. We don't have a separate campaign social media, but we will eventually. But you can go to his Twitter page as well, at Dr. Cornel West, and you'll see this gorgeous artwork that was created by Mr. Fish. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but it's worth taking a look. And we put it out, and now we're seeing it all over the internet, and people are making T-shirts and just going to town. And we're going to be doing this regularly. So I just say welcome and join the team, and we're here for you. So join the campaign, and it's going to be unlike, I think, any other campaign that you've been a part of. It is for me already, I have to say. So it's really wonderful, and there's such a sense of spirit. I mean, I'm sure there was in the Sanders campaign too, but there's kind of like a whole different demographic here. It's like the people who just weren't sure about Sanders and weren't sure they could trust him. Or maybe they tried it, and then got really discouraged. But there are 80 million people who didn't vote in 2020, largely of color, young, and low income. And there is a home for this movement now for justice. And, as Dr. West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And he's just, a really delightful shining light for where we have to go and how we can go there together and just have a wonderful community that we're building in the process. And so come and join it.
Awesome. Jill, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sabby. Really great talking with you, and I look forward to the next time.
All right, guys. And here is that artwork that Jill was referring to. It is really nice, huh? So it says, let us fight and build together in the name of truth and justice. And you can see the artwork here. Yeah, that one is really nice. It says Cornel West 24, people before profits. PBP. You down with PBP? Yeah, you know me. That could be a t-shirt too, huh? You down with PBP? Yeah, you know me. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I'm very excited about this. So I hope that was informative to you guys.